Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing at the base of a towering stone pyramid, deep in the heart of a tropical jungle. The air is thick and warm, heavy with the scent of exotic flowers and the calls of colorful birds hidden in the canopy above. Vines creep up ancient walls carved with mysterious glyphs and fearsome faces of gods whose names have been forgotten for centuries. Before you rises a structure so massive, so perfectly aligned with the stars, that even today engineers marvel at how it was built without metal tools, without wheels, without beasts of burden. This is the world of the ancient Maya and the mighty Aztec, civilizations that flourished in the Americas for thousands of years before European ships appeared on the horizon. Civilizations that built cities larger than any in Europe, developed mathematics and astronomy more advanced than their Old World counterparts, and then vanished into the jungle, leaving behind mysteries that continue to puzzle archaeologists and historians to this day. Tonight, we journey to ancient Mesoamerica, to the lands we now call Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. We will explore the rise and fall of the Maya, who built magnificent cities in the jungle and then mysteriously abandoned them. We will witness the blood-soaked splendor of the Aztec Empire, whose capital city amazed the Spanish conquistadors who came to destroy it. We will decode ancient calendars and decipher hieroglyphic writing. We will climb temple pyramids and descend into sacred caves. And we will try to understand how these remarkable civilizations achieved so much and why they ultimately fell. Let your breathing slow and your mind drift as we step back through time, across the ocean, into a world of jade and obsidian, of chocolate and human sacrifice, of magnificent art and terrible beauty. Fact 1. The Maya civilization is one of the oldest and longest-lasting in the Americas, spanning more than 3,000 years from around 2000 BCE to the Spanish conquest in the 16th century and, in some ways, continuing to the present day. Unlike the Aztec Empire, which rose and fell in less than 2 centuries, the Maya developed gradually over millennia, building increasingly complex societies that reached their peak during what archaeologists call the Classic Period, from about 250 CE to 900 CE. During this time, the Maya constructed magnificent cities throughout southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. They developed the most sophisticated writing system in the pre-Columbian Americas, made remarkable advances in mathematics and astronomy, and created art and architecture that still inspires wonder today. Fact 2. The Maya were not a single unified empire but rather a collection of city-states, similar to ancient Greece, that shared a common culture, language family, and religious beliefs while frequently warring with each other. Major Maya cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, and Copan were independent political centers, each ruled by its own divine king who claimed descent from the gods. These cities competed for power, formed alliances, and waged wars against each other for centuries. The lack of political unity meant that Maya civilization was both more resilient and more fragmented than centralized empires. When one city fell, others continued to flourish. But it also meant that the Maya never achieved the kind of territorial expansion that characterized the later Aztec Empire. Fact 3. Maya cities were carefully planned urban centers that could support populations of tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people. At the heart of each city stood monumental architecture including stepped pyramids, palaces, ball courts, and plazas where public ceremonies took place. These stone structures were covered with stucco and painted in brilliant colors, primarily red, that have mostly faded over the centuries. Surrounding the ceremonial center were residential areas of varying quality, from stone houses of the elite to wooden and thatched structures of commoners. Beyond the city proper lay agricultural land, carefully managed to support the urban population through a combination of raised fields, terraces, and forest gardens. Fact 4. The Maya developed a sophisticated writing system using hieroglyphic symbols that could represent either whole words or syllables. This writing system, which used over 800 distinct signs, was the most complete writing system developed in the pre-Columbian Americas and one of only a handful of writing systems invented independently in human history. Maya scribes recorded history, mythology, astronomical observations, and ritual calendars on stone monuments, on painted ceramics, and in folding books made from bark paper called codices. For centuries after the Spanish conquest, the Maya script could not be read, but beginning in the 1950s, scholars began making breakthroughs in decipherment. Today, most Maya inscriptions can be read, revealing a detailed history of kings, queens, wars, and alliances. Fact 5. Only 4 Maya codices survive today, out of what must have been thousands of books produced over the centuries. The rest were deliberately destroyed by Spanish missionaries who saw them as works of the devil. The most notorious act of destruction occurred in 1562 when Bishop Diego de Landa ordered the burning of Maya books and religious objects in the town of Mani in the Yucatan. Landa later wrote that the Maya took the destruction very hard, which suggests how precious these books were to them. Ironically, Landa also produced a detailed account of Maya culture and a partial key to their writing system that proved invaluable to later scholars attempting to decipher Maya script. The surviving codices deal primarily with astronomy, divination, and religious ritual. Fact 6. Maya mathematics was remarkably advanced, featuring 2 innovations that took much longer to develop in the Old World. First, the Maya used a vigesimal or base 20 number system rather than the base 10 system used in most of the world today. Second, and most remarkably, they independently invented the concept of zero, representing it with a shell-shaped symbol. Zero is not an obvious concept, and its invention is one of the great intellectual achievements in human history. In Europe, the concept of zero was not widely adopted until the Middle Ages, when it was imported from India via Arab mathematicians. The Maya were using zero for calculations while the Romans were still struggling with their cumbersome numeral system. Fact 7. The Maya developed an extraordinarily accurate calendar system, or rather, several interlocking calendar systems that together could track time across vast spans. The Tzolk'in was a 260-day sacred calendar used primarily for divination and religious ceremonies. The Hab was a 365-day solar calendar used for agricultural planning and secular affairs. These 2 calendars combined to create the calendar round, which repeated every 52 years. For tracking longer periods, the Maya developed the long count, which measured time from a mythological creation date corresponding to August 11, 3114 BCE in our calendar. The long count allowed the Maya to record dates millions of years in the past or future with precision. Fact 8. The so-called Maya prophecy about the end of the world in 2012 was based on a misunderstanding of the long count calendar. December 21, 2012 marked the end of a major cycle in the Maya calendar called a Bactan, specifically the 13th Bactan since the creation date. Some modern interpreters claim this date would bring apocalypse or transformation, but actual Maya inscriptions that mention this date speak of it simply as a time of celebration when the gods would return, similar to how we celebrate the new millennium. The Maya calendar did not end in 2012 any more than our calendar ended on December 31, 1999. It simply rolled over to a new cycle, just as it had done before and will do again. Fact 9. Maya astronomy was extraordinarily sophisticated, achieved entirely through naked-eye observation and mathematical calculation without telescopes or other optical instruments. Maya astronomers tracked the movements of the sun, moon, and visible planets with remarkable accuracy. They calculated the length of the solar year to within seconds of the modern value. They tracked the cycles of Venus with particular care, as Venus had important religious significance and its cycles were used to time warfare. They predicted eclipses and recorded them in their inscriptions. Astronomical observations were conducted from specialized buildings designed to frame specific celestial events, and the results were recorded in tables that allowed priests to predict future astronomical events. Fact 10. The planet Venus held particular importance in Maya astronomy and religion, associated with warfare, sacrifice, and the feathered serpent deity known as Kukulkan to the Maya and Quetzalcoatl to later Mesoamerican peoples. The Maya carefully tracked Venus's 584-day cycle as it appeared alternately as the morning star and the evening star. War expeditions were often timed to coincide with significant points in the Venus cycle, particularly its first appearance as the morning star after a period of invisibility. The Dresden Codex, one of the 4 surviving Maya books, contains elaborate Venus tables that could be used to predict the planet's appearances and disappearances for centuries into the future. Fact 11. The Maya practiced human sacrifice, though not on the industrial scale of the later Aztecs. Sacrifice was seen as necessary to nourish the gods who had sacrificed their own blood to create humanity. The most common form of sacrifice involved bloodletting, in which individuals pierced their own bodies with obsidian blades or stingray spines to offer their blood to the gods. Kings and queens regularly performed these bloodletting rituals on important occasions. Actual human sacrifice, in which victims were killed, was reserved for special circumstances such as the dedication of important buildings or the accession of new rulers. War captives, particularly captured nobles and enemy kings, were the preferred sacrificial victims. Fact 12. The Maya ball game was far more than a sport. It was a ritual activity with profound religious and political significance that was played throughout Mesoamerica for over 3,000 years. The game was played with a solid rubber ball on a long, narrow court with sloping or vertical walls. Players could strike the ball only with their hips, shoulders, or forearms, not their hands or feet. The exact rules varied across time and place, and the game could be played simply for recreation or as a deadly serious ritual in which losers, or perhaps winners, were sacrificed to the gods. Ball courts were prominent features of Maya cities, and the largest known court, at Chichen Itza, measures 545 feet long. Fact 13. Chichen Itza, located in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, is perhaps the most famous Maya archaeological site and one of the new 7 wonders of the world. The site reached its height between 900 and 1200 CE, relatively late in Maya history, and shows significant influence from Central Mexican cultures as well as traditional Maya elements. The most iconic structure is the Pyramid of Kukulkan, also called El Castillo, a step pyramid that demonstrates sophisticated astronomical knowledge. On the spring and fall equinoxes, the setting sun creates a shadow pattern on the pyramid's stairway that resembles a serpent descending from the temple at the top. This phenomenon, whether intentionally designed or coincidental, draws thousands of visitors to Chichen Itza each equinox. Fact 14. The sacred cenote at Chichen Itza was a natural sinkhole that served as a major pilgrimage destination and sacrificial site. The Maya believed cenotes, which are common in the limestone terrain of the Yucatan, were entrances to the underworld and portals to communicate with the gods. Archaeological investigation of the sacred cenote has recovered thousands of objects thrown into the water as offerings, including jade, gold, obsidian, pottery, and human bones. The human remains include both adults and children, some showing signs of trauma indicating sacrifice. Pilgrims traveled great distances to make offerings at this sacred site, bringing treasures from across Mesoamerica and even as far as Colombia and Panama. Fact 15. The Maya collapse is one of the great mysteries of archaeology. During the 9th century CE, at the height of classic Maya civilization, city after city in the southern lowlands was abandoned. Construction stopped, inscriptions ceased, and populations dropped dramatically. Within a few generations, the great cities were empty, slowly being reclaimed by the jungle. Various theories have been proposed to explain the collapse, including warfare, environmental degradation, drought, and social upheaval. Current evidence suggests that a combination of factors, particularly severe droughts combined with the environmental impact of supporting large populations, created conditions that the classic Maya political system could not survive. But Maya civilization did not end entirely, it continued in different forms in other regions until the Spanish conquest. Fact 16. Tikal was one of the largest and most powerful Maya cities, located in what is now northern Guatemala. At its peak between 600 and 900 CE, Tikal may have had a population of 100,000 or more, making it one of the largest cities in the world at that time. The city's massive temple pyramids, some reaching over 200 feet tall, rise above the jungle canopy and are visible for miles. Tikal was a major political and economic center, engaged in long-distance trade and often at war with rival city-states, particularly its archenemy Calakmul. The rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul shaped Maya history for centuries, with each city seeking to dominate the other and control the region. Fact 17. Palenque, located in the foothills of the mountains in Chiapas, Mexico, is famous for its elegant architecture and the remarkable tomb of its greatest king, Chichen Itza, known today simply as Pacal the Great. Pacal ruled for 68 years, from 615 to 683 CE, the longest documented reign in Maya history. His tomb, discovered in 1952 deep inside the Temple of the Inscriptions, contained a jade burial mask, elaborate jade ornaments, and a magnificent carved sarcophagus lid that depicts Pacal at the moment of death, falling into the jaws of the underworld. Some fringe theorists have claimed the sarcophagus lid depicts an astronaut in a spaceship, but Mayanists recognize it as consistent with Maya religious iconography. Fact 18. Maya architecture achieved remarkable feats without the use of metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or draft animals. Massive stone blocks were quarried using stone tools and fire, then transported by human labor and raised into position using ramps and leverage. Buildings were constructed using the corbelled arch, in which stones are progressively offset inward until they meet at the top, rather than the true arch used in the Old World. This technique limited the span that could be covered but created the distinctive narrow vaulted rooms found in Maya buildings. Exteriors were elaborately decorated with carved stone, molded stucco, and paint, creating a visual splendor that is difficult to imagine from the bare stone ruins we see today. Fact 19. The Maya developed a rich tradition of painted ceramics that provide invaluable information about their beliefs, rituals, and daily life. Elite burials contained elaborately painted vessels depicting mythology, historical events, and scenes from courtly life. These paintings show details that are not recorded in stone inscriptions, including clothing, body paint, ritual practices, and interactions between people. Some of the finest Maya painting survives on these ceramics, showing sophisticated use of line, color, and composition. The scenes depicted range from solemn ritual to lively entertainment, from terrifying underworld journeys to intimate moments between rulers and their attendants. Fact 20. Chocolate was one of the great gifts of Mesoamerica to the world, and the Maya were among the first to cultivate cacao and develop chocolate beverages. The Maya word cacao gives us our word cacao. For the Maya, chocolate was far more than a pleasant drink. It was a sacred substance associated with the gods, used in rituals, and served at important ceremonies. Maya chocolate was very different from modern hot chocolate, prepared as a bitter, frothy beverage flavored with chili peppers, vanilla, or honey. Cacao beans were also used as currency, and accumulating cacao was a form of wealth. When the Spanish encountered chocolate, they initially found it unpleasant, but it would eventually become one of the most popular flavors in the world. Fact 21. The Aztec Empire was a relatively late development in Mesoamerican history, rising to dominance only about a century before the Spanish conquest. The Aztecs, or more properly the Mexica, were originally a wandering tribe who arrived in the Valley of Mexico in the 13th century CE. According to their own legends, they came from a mythical homeland called Aztlan, from which the name Aztec derives. When they arrived in the valley, all the good land was already occupied by established city-states. The Mexica spent decades as mercenaries and subordinates before finding their destined home on an island in Lake Texcoco, where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus eating a snake, fulfilling a prophecy that told them where to build their city. Fact 22. Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, was founded in 1325 on an island in Lake Texcoco. What began as a modest settlement grew over 2 centuries into one of the largest cities in the world, with a population estimated between 200,000 and 300,000 at the time of the Spanish conquest. The city was connected to the mainland by 3 great causeways and supplied with fresh water by aqueducts from springs on the shore. The center of the city featured a massive sacred precinct containing the Templo Mayor, a twin pyramid dedicated to the gods Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, along with dozens of other temples, palaces, and ceremonial structures. The Spanish conquistadors who first saw Tenochtitlan compared it to Venice and to the enchanted cities of their romances, unable to believe such a magnificent place existed. Fact 23. The Aztec Empire was actually a triple alliance of 3 city-states, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. Tenochtitlan was the dominant partner, but the alliance structure meant that the empire was not as centralized as European kingdoms. The Aztecs conquered neighboring peoples and demanded tribute in goods and sacrificial victims, but they generally allowed conquered peoples to maintain their own rulers and customs as long as they paid tribute and provided warriors and sacrificial victims when demanded. This system created an empire that was vast but brittle. Many subject peoples resented Aztec rule and would later ally with the Spanish against their Aztec overlords. Fact 24. Aztec society was hierarchically organized, with the emperor, called the Tlatoani or speaker, at the top. Below him were nobles called Pipiltin who held governmental, military, and religious offices. The majority of the population were commoners called Massahualtin who worked as farmers, craftsmen, and merchants. At the bottom were slaves, though Aztec slavery was different from the chattel slavery of later European colonies. Aztec slaves had rights, could own property, and could earn or buy their freedom. Children of slaves were born free. People could become slaves through crime, debt, or war, but they were not a permanently hereditary class. Social mobility was possible, particularly through military achievement, which could elevate commoners to noble status. Fact 25. Aztec education was remarkably comprehensive for its time, with mandatory schooling for all children regardless of social class. Children of nobles attended the Calmecac, where they received rigorous training in religion, warfare, history, astronomy, and governance. Children of commoners attended the Telpacali, which focused more on practical skills and military training. Girls were educated primarily in domestic skills by their mothers, though some exceptional women achieved distinction as priestesses, healers, or merchants. The emphasis on universal education meant that Aztec society had relatively high levels of literacy and knowledge transmission, with oral tradition supplemented by pictographic books that recorded history, tribute lists, and religious information. Fact 26. Aztec religion centered on the need to keep the cosmos in balance through offerings to the gods, most dramatically through human sacrifice. The Aztecs believed that the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world and that humanity had a debt to the gods that could only be repaid with human blood. The sun god Huitzilopochtli, patron deity of the Aztecs, required constant nourishment to continue his daily battle against darkness. Without sacrifice, the sun would not rise, crops would not grow, and the world would end. This belief drove the Aztecs to conduct warfare specifically to capture prisoners for sacrifice, creating what scholars call the Flowery Wars, ritualized conflicts designed to provide sacrificial victims rather than to conquer territory. Fact 27. Human sacrifice in the Aztec Empire occurred on a scale unprecedented in Mesoamerican history. While earlier cultures practiced sacrifice, the Aztecs elevated it to an industrial level. At the dedication of the reconstructed Templo Mayor in 1487, the Aztecs reportedly sacrificed tens of thousands of victims over 4 days, though some scholars believe the numbers were exaggerated. The most common method was to stretch the victim over a sacrificial stone, cut open the chest with an obsidian knife, and remove the still-beating heart to offer to the gods. The body was then thrown down the temple steps and might be dismembered, with parts distributed for ritual cannibalism. While shocking to modern sensibilities, this practice was central to Aztec religion and was carried out with genuine belief that it was necessary to preserve the world. Fact 28. Aztec gods were numerous and complex, often representing multiple aspects of nature and human experience. Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird of the left, was the Aztec tribal god and god of war and the sun. Tlaloc was the ancient god of rain, essential for agriculture, worshipped throughout Mesoamerica for millennia before the Aztecs arrived. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was associated with wind, learning, and civilization, and in one aspect with the planet Venus. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, was a god of night, sorcery, and rulership, often depicted as a rival to Quetzalcoatl. Coatlicue was the fearsome earth goddess, depicted wearing a skirt of serpents and a necklace of human hearts and hands. These and dozens of other deities received worship, offerings, and sacrifice. Fact 29. The Aztec calendar, like the Maya calendar, combined a 260-day sacred calendar called the Tanapwali with a 365-day solar calendar called the Xiapawali. Every 52 years, when both calendars returned to their starting points simultaneously, the Aztecs celebrated the new fire ceremony. All fires throughout the empire were extinguished. People destroyed their household goods and waited in darkness for the moment when priests would kindle a new fire on a sacrificial victim's chest. If the fire lit successfully, it would be carried by runners throughout the empire to relight the hearth fires of every home, signifying that the world would continue for another 52 years. The fear and relief of this ceremony was genuine, as the Aztecs believed the world could end at this transition. Fact 30. The Aztec writing system was less developed than that of the Maya, using pictographs and ideographs that could record names, dates, places, and events but could not represent speech sound by sound as Maya hieroglyphics could. Aztec books, called codices, were painted on bark paper or animal hide in a folding screen format. They recorded historical events, tribute lists, religious ceremonies, calendrical information, and genealogies. Most Aztec codices were destroyed during the Spanish conquest, but some survived, and Spanish friars worked with indigenous informants to create new codices that recorded pre-conquest culture. These sources, supplemented by archaeological evidence, allow us to reconstruct Aztec history and culture in considerable detail. Fact 31. The Templo Mayor, the great temple at the heart of Tenochtitlan, was the most sacred site in the Aztec world. This massive twin pyramid, reaching about 150 feet tall, was dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, representing the Aztec dependence on both warfare and agriculture. The temple was rebuilt 7 times, each new version larger than the last, with the previous temple simply buried inside the new construction. Human sacrifices were conducted at the twin shrines at the summit, with blood flowing down the steep stairs. When the Spanish conquered Tenochtitlan, they demolished the Templo Mayor and used its stones to build a cathedral. The temple's foundations were rediscovered in 1978 when electrical workers stumbled upon a massive carved stone disc depicting the dismembered goddess Coyolxauhqui. Fact 32. The marketplace of Tlatelolco, a sister city to Tenochtitlan that was eventually absorbed into the larger capital, was one of the largest marketplaces in the world. The conquistador Bernal Díaz del Castillo, who accompanied Cortés, wrote that he had been to Constantinople, Rome, and other great cities, but he had never seen a marketplace so large, so well organized, and so filled with people. An estimated 60,000 people visited the market daily, buying and selling everything from food and clothing to slaves and precious feathers. Specialized judges settled disputes and ensured honest dealing. The market operated without coined money, using cacao beans, cotton cloaks, and other standardized goods as currency. Fact 33. Aztec agriculture was remarkably productive, supporting one of the densest populations in the pre-industrial world. The most distinctive agricultural technique was the chinampa, sometimes called a floating garden, though it did not actually float. Chinampas were artificial islands created by piling up mud and vegetation in the shallow lakes of the Valley of Mexico, then anchoring them with trees planted at the corners. These islands were incredibly fertile, yielding multiple harvests per year and producing the food needed to support the massive population of Tenochtitlan and surrounding cities. The Chinampa system transformed the lakes around Tenochtitlan into a productive agricultural landscape that amazed the Spanish when they first saw it. Fact 34. Aztec warriors were organized into military orders, the most prestigious being the Eagle Warriors and the Jaguar Warriors. These elite soldiers wore distinctive costumes representing their order, with Eagle Warriors wearing feathered helmets shaped like eagle heads and Jaguar Warriors wearing jaguar skins with the animal's head as a helmet. Advancement in these orders was based on capturing enemies for sacrifice, with specific numbers of captures required to achieve each rank. A warrior who captured 4 enemies earned the right to wear special insignia and share in tribute. Warriors who died in battle or sacrifice were believed to accompany the sun across the sky for 4 years before being reborn as hummingbirds or butterflies, the most glorious afterlife possible. Fact 35. The Aztec concept of the afterlife was not primarily moral, in the sense of rewards for good behavior and punishments for bad. Instead, how one died determined where one's soul would go. Warriors who died in battle or on the sacrificial stone went to the eastern paradise to accompany the sun. Women who died in childbirth, considered equivalent to dying in battle, went to the western paradise. Those who drowned or were struck by lightning went to Tlalocan, the paradise of the rain god. Most people, regardless of how they had lived, went to Mictlan, the underworld, a gloomy place reached after a 4-year journey through 9 challenging levels. This journey required offerings placed in the grave, which is why Aztec burials included goods to help the deceased on their way. Fact 36. The Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire was accomplished in just 2 years, from 1519 to 1521, by a small force of Spanish soldiers led by Hernán Cortés. Cortés landed on the Gulf Coast with about 500 soldiers, 16 horses, and a few cannons. He was vastly outnumbered by Aztec forces, but several factors worked in his favor. Many indigenous peoples, resentful of Aztec domination, allied with the Spanish against their overlords. Aztec weapons, while effective in their own context, were no match for Spanish steel swords, armor, and firearms. And most devastatingly, European diseases, particularly smallpox, swept through the indigenous population, killing millions who had no immunity to these unfamiliar pathogens. Fact 37. The role of La Malinche, also known as Dona Marina, in the Spanish conquest illustrates the complex dynamics of the conquest. She was a Nahua woman who was given to Cortés as a slave shortly after his arrival. She spoke both Nahuatl, the Aztec language, and Mayan, and quickly learned Spanish, becoming Cortés's interpreter, advisor, and mistress. Her knowledge of local languages, politics, and customs was invaluable to the Spanish. She has been viewed differently across history, sometimes as a traitor who helped destroy her own people, sometimes as a survivor who made the best of impossible circumstances, sometimes as a mother of the mestizo people who would emerge from the mixing of Spanish and indigenous populations. Fact 38. The Aztec Emperor Moctezuma II initially welcomed Cortés, possibly believing the Spanish might be divine beings or fulfilling some prophecy. This traditional account, however, may be a later invention created by the Spanish to justify the conquest or by indigenous people to explain their defeat. Whatever Moctezuma's initial thinking, the relationship quickly deteriorated. Cortés took Moctezuma hostage in his own palace, using him to control the empire. When Moctezuma tried to calm his angry people during an uprising, he was struck by stones thrown from the crowd and died shortly after. Whether he died from these wounds or was killed by the Spanish remains disputed. His death left the Aztecs leaderless at a critical moment. Fact 39. The Noche Triste, or Sad Night, occurred on June 30, 1520, when the Spanish were driven out of Tenochtitlan with heavy losses. After months of tension, the Aztecs rose against the Spanish occupiers. Cortés and his men tried to escape across one of the causeways connecting the island city to the mainland, but the bridges had been destroyed. Weighed down by stolen gold, many Spanish soldiers drowned in the lake. Hundreds of Spanish soldiers died, along with thousands of their indigenous allies. Cortés reportedly wept at the losses. But the Spanish regrouped, built ships to control the lake, and besieged Tenochtitlan. After 80 days of siege, during which smallpox devastated the defenders, the city fell on August 13, 1521. Fact 40. The fall of Tenochtitlan marked the end of the Aztec Empire but not the end of indigenous Mexican civilization. The Spanish built Mexico City directly on top of the ruins of Tenochtitlan, using stones from Aztec temples to construct churches and government buildings. Indigenous people survived, though in vastly reduced numbers due to disease, and their languages, beliefs, and customs persisted alongside Spanish colonial culture. Today, over 1 million people still speak Nahuatl, the Aztec language, and indigenous traditions continue to influence Mexican culture in food, festivals, and worldview. The eagle on the cactus eating a snake, the symbol from the Aztec founding legend, appears on the Mexican flag, connecting the modern nation to its pre-Columbian past. Fact 41. The Maya, unlike the Aztecs, were never fully conquered in a single dramatic campaign. Spanish conquest of Maya territories was a prolonged process lasting over a century, from the first contact in 1511 to the fall of the last independent Maya kingdom in 1697. Maya resistance was fierce and sustained, aided by the difficult jungle terrain and the lack of a centralized empire that could be decapitated with a single blow. Even after nominal Spanish control was established, Maya rebellions continued periodically through the colonial period and beyond. The caste war of Yucatan in the 19th century saw Maya forces nearly expel the European-descended population from the peninsula. Fact 42. Today, approximately 6 million people identify as Maya and speak one of the 30 or so Maya languages that survive. They live primarily in southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, often in the same regions where their ancestors built the great classic Maya cities. Many continue traditional practices including weaving, agriculture, and religious ceremonies that blend pre-Columbian and Catholic elements. Maya communities have faced discrimination and marginalization, but there has been a growing movement to preserve and revitalize Maya languages and culture. The Maya are not a vanished people of the past but a living culture with an unbroken connection to their remarkable ancestors. Fact 43. The cenotes of the Yucatan Peninsula were sacred to the ancient Maya, and they remain important today both culturally and practically. These natural sinkholes, formed when limestone bedrock collapses to expose groundwater below, were the primary source of fresh water in a region with few rivers or lakes. The Maya built many of their cities near cenotes and conducted rituals at their edges, making offerings to the gods believed to dwell in the waters. Today, cenotes are popular tourist attractions, offering opportunities for swimming in crystal-clear waters surrounded by dramatic rock formations and jungle vegetation. Archaeologists continue to explore cenotes, recovering offerings and occasionally human remains that illuminate ancient Maya beliefs. Fact 44. The jaguar was the most sacred animal in Mesoamerican culture, revered by both Maya and Aztecs as a symbol of power, royalty, and the underworld. The jaguar was associated with the night sun as it traveled through the underworld between sunset and sunrise. Maya kings often incorporated jaguar imagery into their names and titles, wore jaguar pelts, and sat on jaguar skin thrones. Aztec jaguar warriors were among the most elite soldiers, honored for their courage and ferocity. The jaguar's ability to hunt in water, on land, and in trees made it the master of all realms, a fitting symbol for rulers who claimed dominion over the earthly and supernatural worlds. Fact 45. Obsidian, a volcanic glass, was one of the most valuable materials in Mesoamerican civilization. When properly worked, obsidian produces the sharpest edge of any natural material, sharper even than modern surgical steel. Maya and Aztec craftsmen made obsidian into knives, spear points, and the sacrificial blades used to cut out human hearts. Obsidian mirrors were used for divination, believed to reveal hidden truths. The trade in obsidian from volcanic sources to regions without local supplies was a major economic activity, and control of obsidian sources conveyed significant power. The Aztec god Tezcatlipoca, whose name means smoking mirror, was associated with obsidian mirrors and the dark knowledge they could reveal. Fact 46. Jade was even more precious than gold in Mesoamerican cultures, prized for its brilliant green color that evoked life, water, and growing vegetation. Maya rulers wore elaborate jade jewelry including ear flares, necklaces, and pectorals. The most sacred jade objects were burial masks composed of small jade pieces arranged to cover the face of a deceased king. Jade was associated with breath, spirit, and the vital force that animated living things. When the Spanish arrived seeking gold, indigenous people were puzzled by their obsession with a metal that, while pretty, seemed less valuable than jade. The Spanish, in turn, could not understand why the natives valued green stones over gold. This clash of values symbolizes the profound cultural differences between the Old World and the New. Fact 47. Rubber was another Mesoamerican innovation unknown to the Old World before contact. The Maya and other Mesoamerican peoples learned to tap rubber trees and process the latex into a bouncy, waterproof material. The solid rubber balls used in the ball game are the most famous application, but rubber was also used to make waterproof containers, coat cloth for rain protection, and create handles for tools. When Europeans first encountered rubber balls, they were amazed at their ability to bounce, as nothing similar existed in Europe. Rubber would eventually become one of the most important industrial materials in the modern world, but its first uses were developed by Mesoamerican innovators thousands of years ago. Fact 48. The feathered serpent deity, known as Kukulkan to the Maya and Quetzalcoatl to the Aztecs, was one of the most important gods in Mesoamerican religion. This divine figure combined the earthbound serpent with the heavenly Quetzal bird, creating a being that united earth and sky, matter and spirit. Quetzalcoatl was associated with wind, learning, arts, and civilization. In some traditions, he was a culture hero who invented the calendar, discovered corn, and taught humanity the arts of civilization. The legend that Quetzalcoatl would one day return from the east led some to suggest that the Aztecs initially believed Cortés might be the returning god, though this interpretation is now questioned by many scholars. Fact 49. The Quetzal bird, whose brilliant green tail feathers were among the most prized materials in Mesoamerica, was sacred to Maya and Aztec alike. These iridescent green feathers, which can grow over 2 feet long on male birds, were reserved for royalty and religious use. Killing a quetzal was reportedly a capital offense in some Maya kingdoms. Instead, birds were captured, their tail feathers carefully plucked, and the birds released to grow new feathers. Quetzal feathers adorned royal headdresses, including the famous headdress traditionally associated with Moctezuma that is now in a museum in Vienna. The quetzal remains the national bird of Guatemala, and Guatemala's currency is named the quetzal in honor of this sacred bird. Fact 50. The Spanish missionaries who followed the conquistadors made systematic efforts to understand indigenous religions in order to more effectively convert the population to Christianity. Friar Bernardino de Sahagun spent decades interviewing Aztec elders and recording their knowledge, producing the Florentine Codex, a massive encyclopedia of Aztec culture written in Nahuatl and Spanish. This and similar works by other friars preserve invaluable information about pre-conquest beliefs and practices. The irony is that the same church that destroyed indigenous religious books and practices also produced the most detailed records of what was lost. Without the work of these conflicted missionaries, our knowledge of Mesoamerican civilization would be far more limited. Fact 51. Corn, or maize, was the foundation of Mesoamerican civilization, as essential to these cultures as wheat was to Europe or rice to Asia. The Maya creation story told in the Popol Vuh describes how the gods created the first successful humans from corn dough after failed attempts with mud and wood. Corn was not just a food source but a sacred substance intimately connected to human identity. The domestication of corn from a wild grass called teosinte was a process that took thousands of years and required remarkable botanical knowledge. Modern corn cannot survive without human cultivation, as its seeds do not disperse naturally. The development of corn was one of the great agricultural achievements of human history, eventually spreading from Mesoamerica to become a staple crop worldwide. Fact 52. The Popol Vuh is the creation epic of the Chichen Maya of highland Guatemala, often called the Maya Bible. It tells the story of the creation of the world, the adventures of the hero twins Hunahpu and Palenque in the underworld, and the origin of the Chichen people. The hero twins' descent to Xibalba, the Maya underworld, where they defeat the lords of death through cleverness and then rise to become the sun and moon, is one of the great mythological narratives of world literature. The Popol Vuh was written down in the Latin alphabet shortly after the Spanish conquest, preserving an oral tradition that had been passed down for centuries. It provides our most detailed window into Maya mythology and worldview. Fact 53. Xibalba, the Maya underworld, was not a realm of punishment for sinners but a dangerous place all souls had to navigate after death. The name Xibalba means place of fear, and it was ruled by death gods who delighted in trickery and torment. The Popol Vuh describes Xibalba as containing houses of trials including the Dark House, the Rattling House filled with cold, the Jaguar House, the Bat House, and the Razor House. The hero twins survived these challenges through quick thinking and magical abilities. Ordinary souls presumably faced similar trials, which is why the living provided the dead with offerings and guidance for their journey. The Maya concept of the afterlife emphasized danger and difficulty rather than reward or punishment. Fact 54. Maya bloodletting rituals were practiced by both kings and queens as a way to communicate with ancestors and gods. The most famous depiction of royal bloodletting shows Lady Zok, Queen of Yaxchilan, pulling a thorn-studded rope through her tongue while her husband King Shield Jaguar holds a torch above her. The blood dripping onto paper in a bowl below would be burned, and the rising smoke was believed to manifest ancestors or deities in the form of a vision serpent. These rituals were not simple self-torture but profound religious acts that demonstrated the ruler's willingness to suffer for the benefit of the kingdom and that opened channels of communication with supernatural powers. Fact 55. The ancient Maya city of Copan, located in western Honduras, is famous for its elaborate carved stone monuments called stelae. These tall stone shafts were erected to commemorate important events, particularly the anniversaries of royal accessions and the completion of calendrical cycles. Copan's stelae are remarkable for their three-dimensional carving, with figures that seem to emerge from the stone rather than being carved in flat relief. The site is also known for its hieroglyphic stairway, the longest known Maya inscription, containing over 2,000 glyphs that record the history of Copan's royal dynasty. Unfortunately, the stairway collapsed and was reassembled incorrectly in the 19th century, scrambling parts of the text. Fact 56. The collapse of classic Maya civilization in the 9th century remains one of the great mysteries of archaeology, but recent research has provided important clues. Studies of lake sediments and cave formations have revealed evidence of severe droughts during the 9th century that would have devastated Maya agriculture. But drought alone does not explain the collapse, as the Maya had survived droughts before. The Classic period was characterized by intensive warfare between city-states, massive construction projects, and growing populations that placed increasing pressure on the environment. The combination of environmental stress, warfare, and possibly political and religious crisis seems to have created a perfect storm that the classic Maya political system could not survive. Fact 57. Not all Maya cities collapsed in the 9th century. While cities in the southern lowlands like Tikal and Palenque were abandoned, Maya civilization continued to flourish in other regions. In the Yucatan Peninsula, cities like Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and later Mayapan rose to prominence during the post-classic period. In the highlands of Guatemala, the Kich and Caxical Maya built powerful kingdoms that lasted until the Spanish conquest. The so-called Maya collapse was really a transformation, a shift in population and power that left some regions devastated while others thrived. Understanding this complexity is essential to understanding Maya history as a whole. Fact 58. The Dresden Codex is one of the 4 surviving Maya books and the most elaborate and complete. It contains astronomical tables tracking the cycles of Venus and Mars, predictions of eclipses, and tables for calculating the timing of rituals. The accuracy of these astronomical calculations, achieved without telescopes or modern mathematics, is remarkable. The codex also contains images of gods and rituals, providing visual information that supplements the astronomical data. Named for the German city where it has been housed since the 18th century, the Dresden Codex has been essential to deciphering Maya astronomy and understanding the relationship between celestial observations and religious practice. Fact 59. The tzompantli, or skull rack, was a structure for displaying the skulls of sacrificial victims, common in both Maya and Aztec cities. These racks consisted of wooden poles on which skulls were strung like beads, sometimes thousands of them. The tzompantli at Tenochtitlan reportedly held over 100,000 skulls, though this number may be exaggerated. Archaeological excavations have confirmed the existence of massive skull racks at Tenochtitlan and at Chichen Itza. For Mesoamerican peoples, these displays were not morbid trophies but sacred offerings demonstrating the community's devotion to the gods. For the Spanish, they were evidence of diabolic practices that justified conquest and conversion. Fact 60. The Aztec goddess Coatlicue, whose name means serpent skirt, represents one of the most striking images in pre-Columbian art. A monumental statue found in Mexico City in 1790 depicts her with a skirt of writhing snakes, a necklace of human hearts and hands, and two serpent heads facing each other where her head should be, representing blood flowing from her decapitated neck. Her hands and feet end in claws. She represents the earth in its devouring aspect, the mother who gives life and takes it back. When the statue was discovered, it was considered so disturbing that it was reburied, only to be excavated again years later. Today it stands in the National Museum of Anthropology as one of the masterpieces of Aztec sculpture. Fact 61. The Aztecs practiced several forms of ritual cannibalism, consuming the flesh of sacrificial victims in ceremonies that had profound religious significance. This was not simply eating human flesh but participating in a sacred act that connected the living with divine power. The bodies of sacrifice victims were considered sacred, transformed by their death into something holy. Consuming this flesh was a way of sharing in that holiness and incorporating the victim's power and courage. The Spanish were horrified by this practice, which they considered the ultimate proof of Aztec barbarism. The religious meaning was lost on observers who saw only brutality where participants experienced communion with the divine. Fact 62. The Aztec New Fire ceremony, held every 52 years when the solar and sacred calendars aligned, was one of the most dramatic rituals in Mesoamerica. As the ceremony approached, people cleaned their houses, destroyed old pottery and household goods, and extinguished all fires. Pregnant women were locked away for fear they might turn into monsters. Children were kept awake and pinched to prevent them from becoming mice. In darkness, priests climbed to the top of the hill of the star near Tenochtitlan and waited. At the appointed moment, a priest kindled a new fire on the chest of a sacrificial victim. If the fire caught, runners carried flames throughout the empire to relight hearth fires, and the world would continue. If it failed, the gods would descend as monsters to devour humanity. Fact 63. The island city of Tenochtitlan was an engineering marvel, constructed on a site that seemed impossible for urban development. The Aztecs expanded the original small island through a combination of landfill and chinampas, creating a city of canals and causeways that reminded the Spanish of Venice. Fresh water came through aqueducts from springs on the mainland, with one aqueduct having two channels so one could be cleaned while the other remained in use. Waste was removed by boat and used as fertilizer for chinampa agriculture. The city was clean and well organized, with specialized markets, neighborhoods for different crafts, and a sophisticated system of governance. Its destruction by the Spanish was one of the great losses of world heritage. Fact 64. The Spanish advantage in the conquest of Mexico is often attributed to guns, steel, and horses, but disease was by far the most deadly weapon. Smallpox, measles, typhus, and other Old World diseases swept through indigenous populations who had no immunity, killing millions within decades of contact. Estimates suggest that 90% or more of the indigenous population of central Mexico died within a century of the conquest, primarily from disease. The siege of Tenochtitlan succeeded in part because smallpox killed many of the city's defenders, including Moctezuma's successor Cuitlahuac. This catastrophic population collapse made Spanish control possible and shaped the course of Mexican history for centuries. Fact 65. The Virgin of Guadalupe, whose image reportedly appeared on a peasant's cloak in 1531, became the most important religious symbol in Mexico and a unifying figure for Mexican identity. According to tradition, the Virgin Mary appeared to the indigenous convert Juan Diego on the hill of Tepeyac, where an Aztec goddess had previously been worshipped. The Virgin spoke to Juan Diego in Nahuatl, the Aztec language, and her image appeared miraculously on his cloak. The dark-skinned Virgin, speaking the native language and appearing at a site sacred to indigenous religion, helped bridge the gap between conquered and conqueror. Today, the Basilica of Guadalupe is one of the most visited Catholic pilgrimage sites in the world. Fact 66. The Aztec game of Patali was remarkably similar to games played in ancient India, leading some scholars to suggest trans-Pacific contact between civilizations. Patali was a board game played with beans as dice, in which players moved markers around a cross-shaped board. It was popular across all social classes and was associated with gambling, sometimes for high stakes. Players would invoke Macuilxochitl, the god of games, before playing. The similarities to Indian games like Pachisi have intrigued researchers, though most now believe these are coincidental parallels rather than evidence of direct contact. Games that involve counting and movement along a track seem to develop independently in many cultures. Fact 67. The Pactica were a specialized class of long-distance merchants in Aztec society who occupied a unique position between commoners and nobles. They traveled throughout Mesoamerica and beyond, trading luxury goods like cacao, precious feathers, jade, and obsidian. Because they traveled to foreign lands, they also served as spies, gathering intelligence for the Aztec state. Their dangerous profession earned them special privileges, including the right to hold their own courts and conduct their own religious ceremonies. The Pactica were essential to the Aztec economy, connecting the empire to distant sources of valuable goods and spreading Aztec influence far beyond territories under direct political control. Fact 68. Aztec poetry, preserved in collections made shortly after the conquest, reveals a sophisticated literary tradition that valued beauty, philosophical reflection, and emotional expression. Poems celebrated the fleeting nature of life and beauty, asking whether anything on earth is lasting. They praised friendship, mourned the dead, and questioned whether the afterlife offered any certainty. The most famous Aztec poem, attributed to the philosopher King Nezahualcóyotl of Texcoco, compares life to a dream from which we must awaken. These poems, composed in Nahuatl, were meant to be performed with music and dance, adding dimensions of sound and movement that we can only imagine from the surviving texts. Fact 69. The Aztec afterlife destination called Mictlan was reached after a 4-year journey through 9 challenging levels of the underworld. The dead had to cross a wide river, pass between clashing mountains, traverse a plain where the wind cut like obsidian, and face many other obstacles. This is why the dead were cremated with goods to help them on their journey and with a dog to guide them. The ruler of Mictlan was Mictlantecuhtli, a skeletal figure often depicted with his liver hanging out of his body. Unlike Christian concepts of heaven and hell, Mictlan was not a place of reward or punishment but simply the destination of most souls regardless of how they had lived. Fact 70. The Maya civilization developed in a region that seems surprisingly hostile to complex society. The jungle environment, with its thin soils, dense vegetation, and intense rainfall followed by dry seasons, posed significant challenges for agriculture. Yet the Maya not only survived but thrived, developing techniques to extract productivity from this difficult landscape. They created raised fields in swampy areas, terraced hillsides, and managed forest gardens that maintained the appearance of wilderness while actually producing food. Understanding how the Maya achieved so much in this environment remains an active area of research, with implications for sustainable agriculture in tropical regions today. Fact 71. El Mirador, located in the Petén jungle of northern Guatemala, was one of the largest Maya cities ever built, flourishing during the pre-classic period from about 600 BCE to 100 CE, long before the better-known classic period cities. The site includes La Danta, one of the largest pyramids in the world by volume, rising from a jungle platform so massive that it dwarfs even the Egyptian pyramids in total size. El Mirador and surrounding cities formed an urban network connected by raised roads through the swamp. The site was abandoned around 100 CE, possibly due to environmental degradation, and was largely forgotten until its rediscovery in the 20th century. It remains difficult to access, requiring a multi-day trek through the jungle. Fact 72. Maya writing was deciphered largely through the efforts of scholars working in the 20th century, with major breakthroughs occurring in the 1950s through 1980s. Early scholars, including the Soviet researcher Yuri Norizov, demonstrated that Maya glyphs represented syllables as well as whole words. American epigraphers Tatiana Proskuryakov and Linda Skeel built on this work to show that many inscriptions recorded historical events and royal genealogies rather than purely astronomical or religious content. Today, most Maya inscriptions can be read, revealing detailed histories of specific kingdoms, wars, marriages, and rituals. The decipherment of Maya writing is one of the great intellectual achievements of modern scholarship. Fact 73. The Maya city of Uxmal, located in the Puuc region of the Yucatan Peninsula, features some of the finest architecture in the Maya world. The buildings at Uxmal are decorated with elaborate mosaic facades composed of thousands of carefully carved stone pieces fitted together to create geometric patterns, masks of the rain god Chalk, and other designs. The Pyramid of the Magician, Uxmal's most famous structure, has an unusual oval base and steep sides that create a striking silhouette. According to legend, it was built in a single night by a dwarf magician who later became king. Uxmal flourished during the Terminal Classic period, around 800 to 1000 CE, and was later abandoned like most other Maya cities. Fact 74. The Aztec Flower Wars were ritualized conflicts intended to capture prisoners for sacrifice rather than to kill enemies or conquer territory. These wars were fought with obsidian-edged weapons that could maim but were less deadly than metal weapons, allowing more enemies to be taken alive. The flower wars maintained a constant supply of sacrificial victims, provided military training, and served diplomatic purposes by allowing rival states to compete without full-scale warfare. The name comes from the Aztec belief that warriors who died in battle or sacrifice were transformed into butterflies and hummingbirds that fed on flowers. The flower wars reflect how deeply sacrifice and warfare were intertwined in Aztec culture and worldview. Fact 75. The Aztec practice of tribute extraction from conquered peoples created resentment that would prove fatal to the empire. Subject peoples were required to send regular payments to Tenochtitlan, including food, textiles, precious materials, and human beings for sacrifice. The detailed tribute lists preserved in codices show the vast wealth flowing into the Aztec capital from throughout Mesoamerica. But this system created many enemies who would welcome the chance to throw off Aztec domination. When Cortés arrived, he found ready allies among peoples who hated their Aztec overlords. The Tlaxcalans, who had successfully resisted Aztec conquest, became crucial Spanish allies, providing thousands of warriors who fought alongside the few hundred Spaniards. Fact 76. The archaeological site of Monte Alban, in the valley of Oaxaca, Mexico, predates both the Maya Classic period and the Aztec Empire, demonstrating the deep roots of Mesoamerican civilization. Founded around 500 BCE, Monte Alban was the capital of the Zapotec civilization and one of the first true cities in Mesoamerica. At its peak, it may have had a population of 25,000. The site features massive platforms, pyramids, and a ball court, all constructed on a mountaintop that was artificially flattened to create a ceremonial center. Monte Alban was abandoned around 800 CE but continued to be used as a cemetery by later peoples, who created elaborate tombs in its buildings. Fact 77. The Aztec Empire lasted less than a century from its formation in 1428 to its conquest in 1521, yet in that short time it transformed Mesoamerica. The rapid expansion of Aztec power is remarkable, taking the Mexica from a subordinate people to the dominant force in central Mexico within a few generations. This expansion was driven by a combination of military prowess, diplomatic manipulation, and the religious ideology that demanded constant warfare to feed the gods. The speed of Aztec conquest meant that the empire was still consolidating when the Spanish arrived, and many subject peoples remained restive and ready to rebel given the opportunity. Fact 78. Mesoamerican civilizations developed without the wheel, despite knowing the concept. Wheeled toys have been found in archaeological contexts, showing that the principle of the wheel was understood. The absence of wheeled vehicles is usually explained by the lack of suitable draft animals. Before the Spanish introduced horses, the only large domesticated animals in Mesoamerica were dogs and turkeys, neither suitable for pulling vehicles. Without draft animals, wheels offered little advantage over human porters, who could navigate the steep terrain of much of Mesoamerica more easily than wheeled vehicles could. The wheel remained a curiosity rather than a practical technology until European contact brought horses. Fact 79. The Maya developed a sophisticated understanding of astronomy that included the ability to predict eclipses. Eclipse tables in the Dresden Codex show that Maya astronomers understood the patterns governing lunar and solar eclipses and could predict when they would occur. This knowledge had practical religious significance, as eclipses were believed to be dangerous times when supernatural forces threatened the world. The ability to predict these events allowed priests to prepare appropriate rituals and reassure the population. Maya astronomical achievements were accomplished entirely through naked-eye observation and mathematical calculation, without the telescopes and instruments that later astronomers would use. Fact 80. The Spanish conquest brought not only destruction but also a mingling of cultures that created something new. Mexican cuisine blends indigenous and European ingredients, with corn, beans, chilies, chocolate, and tomatoes from the New World combined with wheat, beef, pork, and cheese from the Old. Catholic saints were often associated with indigenous deities, creating syncretic religious practices that persist today. The Day of the Dead, celebrated on November 1st and 2nd, combines Catholic All Saints and All Souls Days with pre-Columbian traditions of honoring deceased ancestors. This cultural blending, or mestizage, created the distinctive culture of modern Mexico. Fact 81. The ancient Maya city of Tulum, perched on cliffs overlooking the Caribbean Sea, is one of the most dramatically situated archaeological sites in the world. Unlike most Maya cities, which were located inland, Tulum was a coastal trading center that flourished during the post-classic period, from around 1200 to 1500 CE. Its location on the coast made it visible to Spanish ships, and Tulum was one of the first Maya cities seen by Europeans. The site's small scale and late date mean it lacks the grandeur of classic period cities, but its seaside setting and well-preserved buildings make it one of the most visited archaeological sites in Mexico today. Fact 82. The Maya concept of time was cyclical rather than linear, with history expected to repeat in patterns governed by the calendar. This meant that understanding the past was essential for predicting the future. Events that had occurred in previous calendar cycles might recur when those positions came around again. Kings timed important actions to coincide with auspicious dates, and historical events were remembered partly for the guidance they could provide when similar celestial and calendrical conditions recurred. This cyclical view of time was fundamentally different from the linear time of Western civilization and influenced everything from politics to religion to daily life. Fact 83. Cacao beans served as currency throughout Mesoamerica, with established exchange rates between cacao and various goods. A turkey might cost 100 cacao beans, a rabbit about 10. This made chocolate literally money, and the wealthy could afford to drink their currency. The association of cacao with wealth and status meant that chocolate beverages were reserved for elites and special occasions. When the Spanish arrived, they initially found chocolate disgusting but eventually acquired a taste for it, adding sugar to make it palatable to European preferences. Chocolate would become one of the most important New World products, transforming global cuisine. Fact 84. The Spanish conquistadors were motivated by gold, but the wealth of Mesoamerica was not primarily in gold. The Aztecs valued jade and feathers far more highly. When the Spanish melted down gold objects to ship back to Spain, they were destroying what to them was treasure but what to the indigenous people was merely pretty metal. The famous headdress associated with Moctezuma, made of quetzal feathers and gold, was valued by the Aztecs primarily for the feathers, not the gold. This clash of values meant that the Spanish destroyed much of what indigenous people considered most precious while obsessively collecting what they considered merely decorative. Fact 85. The ancient Maya used a numerical system that included the concept of zero, represented by a shell glyph. Their numbers were written using dots for ones, bars for fives, and the shell for zero, allowing them to represent any number efficiently. This system was used for calendrical calculations, astronomical observations, and presumably for commerce and administration, though fewer examples survive from these practical contexts. The Maya independently invented 0 centuries before the concept was widely adopted in Europe, demonstrating the sophistication of Maya mathematics and the universal human capacity for abstract thought. Fact 86. Bonampak, a small Maya site in Chiapas, Mexico, is famous for its extraordinary murals, discovered in 1946. These paintings, covering 3 rooms of a small temple, depict a royal court, a battle and its aftermath, and ritual ceremonies including human sacrifice. The scenes are rendered in vivid colors with detailed attention to costume, gesture, and expression. They provide an unparalleled window into Maya court life, showing aspects of ceremony and warfare that are not visible in stone carvings. The murals were preserved by a layer of calcium carbonate deposited by water seeping through the limestone over centuries. Their colors have faded since discovery, but copies preserve their original brilliance. Fact 87. The site of Teotihuacan, located northeast of modern Mexico City, was the largest city in the pre-Columbian Americas, with a population that may have reached 200,000 at its peak around 500 CE. Teotihuacan predated both the classic Maya and the Aztecs, and its influence extended throughout Mesoamerica. The Aztecs believed the site was where the gods created the current world and called it the place where the gods were created. The massive Pyramid of the Sun and Pyramid of the Moon dominate the site, connected by a broad avenue the Aztecs called the Street of the Dead. Teotihuacan collapsed around 750 CE for reasons that remain unclear, but its memory and influence persisted for centuries. Fact 88. The Aztec goddess Tlazolteotl was associated with filth, both physical and moral, and with purification from that filth. She was the goddess of sexual sin, of garbage and excrement, and paradoxically of the confession of sins and absolution from them. Aztecs could confess their moral transgressions to her priests once in their lives and receive forgiveness, similar in some ways to Catholic confession. This aspect of Aztec religion surprised the Spanish, who saw parallels to their own practices but attributed them to diabolical imitation. Tlazolteotl represented the Aztec understanding that impurity and purity, sin and cleansing, were intimately connected aspects of human existence. Fact 89. The Maya believed the world had been created and destroyed multiple times before the current creation. The Popol Vuh describes how the gods made humans from mud, then from wood, then finally from corn. The mud people dissolved, and the wooden people were destroyed in a flood and transformed into monkeys. Only the corn people, made from white and yellow corn, were successful and became the ancestors of humanity. This cycle of creation and destruction reflected the Maya understanding of time as cyclical and the world as perpetually endangered, requiring constant ritual attention to maintain its existence. Fact 90. The Spanish missionary friars who worked to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity often showed genuine respect for indigenous culture even as they sought to replace indigenous religion. Men like Bernardino de Sahagun and Diego Duran learned indigenous languages, recorded indigenous traditions, and worked closely with indigenous assistants to document what was being lost. Their motivations were complex, mixing genuine curiosity with the desire to understand indigenous beliefs well enough to refute them. The documents they produced, despite their biases, preserve irreplaceable information about pre-conquest Mesoamerica and represent a remarkable, if problematic, effort at cross-cultural understanding. Fact 91. The collapse of Maya civilization has been linked by some researchers to environmental degradation caused by intensive agriculture and deforestation. Studies of lake sediments show increased erosion during the late Classic period, suggesting forest clearance was exposing soil to rain. Pollen records show a shift from forest species to agricultural weeds. The Maya may have undermined the environmental foundation of their civilization by pushing agricultural production beyond sustainable limits. When drought struck, a degraded environment could not recover, leading to crop failures, famines, and the political collapse that followed. If true, the Maya collapse offers a cautionary tale about the consequences of environmental mismanagement. Fact 92. Modern descendants of the Maya continue to speak Maya languages and practice traditions with roots in the pre-conquest past. In Guatemala, where Maya peoples make up a significant portion of the population, there have been struggles for indigenous rights and recognition. The Guatemalan Civil War of 1960 to 1996 saw terrible violence against Maya communities, with many thousands killed. In recent decades, there has been a Maya cultural revival, with efforts to preserve languages, revitalize traditional practices, and gain political representation. The Maya are not a vanished people but a living culture continuing to evolve and adapt. Fact 93. The Aztec view of the world as requiring constant nourishment through sacrifice was not unique but represented an extreme development of ideas common throughout Mesoamerica. The underlying belief that the cosmos required renewal through offerings, that human blood was the most precious offering, and that warfare was necessary to obtain sacrificial victims was shared by many Mesoamerican cultures. What distinguished the Aztecs was the scale at which they practiced human sacrifice and the central role it played in state ideology and imperial expansion. The Aztec sacrificial complex was not simply religious tradition but a political tool that justified constant warfare and demonstrated Aztec power. Fact 94. The rediscovery of Maya civilization by the outside world began in the 19th century when explorers like John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood published illustrated accounts of their travels to Maya ruins. Catherwood's detailed drawings of vine-covered pyramids and carved monuments captured public imagination and sparked interest in these mysterious jungle cities. Later explorers, archaeologists, and adventurers uncovered more sites, and the 20th century brought systematic excavation and the gradual decipherment of Maya writing. Today, Maya archaeology is an active field, with new discoveries regularly adding to our understanding of this remarkable civilization. Fact 95. The Night of Sorrows and the eventual Spanish victory over the Aztecs were followed by the construction of colonial Mexico City directly on top of Tenochtitlan. The Spanish drained the lakes that had surrounded the island city, demolishing indigenous structures and using the materials to build churches and government buildings. The Cathedral of Mexico City sits atop the ruins of the Templo Mayor. This layering of the colonial city over the pre-conquest capital meant that Aztec remains lay hidden beneath the modern metropolis. Archaeological excavations continue to reveal fragments of the buried city, with major discoveries occurring whenever construction projects dig into the subsoil. Fact 96. The myths and legends of Mesoamerican civilizations continue to resonate in modern culture. The feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl has appeared in countless books, movies, and games. The Maya calendar gained worldwide attention in the lead-up to 2012. Ancient astronaut theories, though rejected by scholars, have popularized distorted versions of Mesoamerican achievement. More respectfully, Latin American literature has drawn deeply on indigenous mythology, and artists have found inspiration in Precolumbian art. The civilizations of ancient Mesoamerica, once nearly forgotten, have become part of global cultural heritage. Fact 97. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself standing once more before that jungle pyramid. The stars will overhead in patterns the ancient astronomers tracked with obsessive precision. Somewhere in the forest, a jaguar screams. The carved faces of forgotten gods stare from the temple walls with expressions of mysterious meaning. In the plazas below, generations of priests once performed rituals to keep the sun rising and the world turning. Now only tourists and archaeologists walk these paths, trying to understand a civilization that achieved so much and lost so much more. Fact 98. The Maya and the Aztec remind us that human civilization has taken many forms, each with its own achievements and failures, its own beauties and horrors. They built cities and pyramids without metal tools, tracked the stars without telescopes, and created art that still moves us centuries later. They also practiced human sacrifice on scales that shock modern sensibilities. They were fully human, neither the noble savages of romantic imagination nor the bloodthirsty barbarians of conquest propaganda. Understanding them means accepting the full complexity of human possibility, the capacity for both breathtaking achievement and terrible violence. Fact 99. The jungle has reclaimed many of the cities the Maya built, but it has not erased them entirely. Stone endures, and the monuments the Maya raised to their kings and gods still stand beneath the canopy. Each year, archaeologists discover new sites, new inscriptions, new pieces of the puzzle. The story of Mesoamerican civilization is still being written, with each discovery adding depth and nuance to our understanding. And somewhere in the highlands of Guatemala or the villages of the Yucatan, descendants of the Maya still speak languages their ancestors spoke, still plant corn as their ancestors did, still carry forward a tradition that stretches back thousands of years. Sleep now, and let the mysteries of the ancient Americas accompany you into dreams. The pyramids stand silent in the starlight. The cenotes hold their secrets in dark waters. The glyphs on stone monuments still tell their stories to those who can read them. And the spirits of kings and priests, warriors and farmers, drift through the ruins of a world that was great and strange and beautiful and terrible, and that has never entirely disappeared. May your dreams be filled with jade and feathers, with chocolate and starlight, with the enduring mysteries of civilizations lost but not forgotten.